very warm welcome to everyone. It's quite warm here in Cape Town. Really chuffed you've come. And it's just great to see some familiar faces and some people new to Cape Town. So thanks so much. Usual online event etiquette. If you could make sure you're muted. If, like me, you're a bit nervous about tech, Sunette is very sweetly on hand. So if you've got problems, can't hear, if you WhatsApp her. And as you know, we're recording. I hope that's okay. But it does mean that people who've missed out can then go to the Culture Connect YouTube channel and look at it. We love questions and comments. Don't hold back. And Sunette will help with those at the end. So, like a lot of people, started doing online events with the hard lockdown, and we've had some fantastic input from professors actually all around the world, and quite a range of topics that really help understand what one could experience if you did a tour with me. And so the last one we did was about collecting on a shoestring. And then I'll probably do another series in the new year, depending a bit on the pandemic. But like a lot of people, I'll be continuing online. I'm thrilled that next Thursday, the 11th, Ian's going to be talking about his recently published book, The Battle for the Cape, that he and his wife spent 15 years doing really meticulous research around the world. I wish I could do more in the winelands. That will come. So please give me suggestions, both for online programming and face-to-face. And of course, I do private tours, and it's super that tourists, particularly Americans, are coming back. And Leslie Cox, we were in the waterfront today and seeing the queues waiting for Robben Island. It was really encouraging. And as we're all interested in history, I recommend, if you haven't already done it, doing Leslie's tour with me, both at the waterfront or around town. And for the first time, I'm doing one just on the castle, just before the public schools break up. And then I'm still working on what to do in January. So Roger's going to be speaking for 45 minutes. He's going to give us some great stories, lots of images, and the focus is on the fort, as you know. Just wanted to say a bit about Roger, context. Roger, I was trying to think who introduced us. It was about 4 years ago. Can you remember how we met?
Yeah, it was about then, yeah.
Yeah, and we did a tour together, and some of you may recognize, it's Roger's hand. This was the actual event. This is the 16th of January, 2017. You might recognize some of the people there. It's when Roger had a showroom, if that's the right word, in Weinberg with the paper conservators, DK conservatives. Very busy with all the UCT salvaging at the moment. But Roger, you're pretty brainy, I have to say, and very energetic. And I just love the way, even if I ask a very obtuse, obscure question, you seem to answer it immediately, even on a Saturday night. And it's fabulous the way you have your fingers not only in local pies, such as the Cape Medical Museum, but also international, such as the Washington Map Society. Being a doctor, I love the way you talk about yourself being a truant. But I know you've led various businesses and continue to consult. Some of you will know Roger from the summer school, and you can watch on YouTube his winter school talk on Birchall, and you're going to be doing a book soon, aren't you, about Birchall. I'm going to leave it at that and hand over to you.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that introduction, Kate. What I liked about it is it shows that I'm I'm not a historian, I'm not an archaeologist, I'm not a city guide, and I guess that makes me suitably qualified to take a different view of things. And my talk started really with a map which I'll show later. And when in some recent communication with Leslie and with Kate, I was talking about the Golden Acre as a golden heritage spot, and then started calling it the Golden Heritage Area or Golden Heritage Acre. Well, I've now realized it's probably a heritage hectare, which is fine. So please don't take me too literally when it's a talk about 400 years or about an acre. I've been a little bit liberal, but we're not actually going to move away from the northwestern corner of the parade, because in 1 hectare, there's at least 400 years of history, which is really interesting. And the interesting part cannot actually be seen at the moment. So I'm going to talk about that. And there is an essay on the old fort in this book of mine, which was released this month or last month. It's called A Cape Odyssey. I've put the website at the bottom there where one can go and see what is it in there. I've actually included some summaries, and you can purchase it there, or if you contact me directly at my email address, I can ship to you with a small discount, and I'd be interested to receive any orders directly. I'm not going to talk about the scene that you can see there. That's in Colesberg, and we're actually very much in Cape Town. And this is the scene that that I'm going to be talking about. This is a wonderful painting in, of all places, the Austrian National Library. And there was an artist by the name of Andries Beekman, who was in the Cape between December 57 and February 1658. And he's one of the few artists to draw the scene of the Cape who actually visited. Nearly all of them did this from information that they got third hand. And what we can see there is below Table Mountain is the fort, not the castle. That's the original fort with the Dutch flag, which you can see. And here is the Varsche River, the fresh river, which is now underground. And here is the landing place. And this landing area is the source of a lot of the postal stones, which we will talk about. So this is the area that we're going to talk about. But I want to go back first to the very first map, and this is the first map dedicated to the Cape of Good Hope. And the Latin, for those of you who don't know the Latin, says that this is the outline or the plan of the promontory commonly known as the Cape of Good Hope. It was published in 1605, and there's a little one that you can see here, and that's Table Bay. And it was at this visit by Joris van Spilbergen, who came in 1601, and he renamed it. It had been named as Saldanha Bay, and it stayed like that for almost a century. And he renamed it because obviously he thought he was somewhere else. He thought he was in this other little bay on the left-hand side here, which is very distorted. And this comes from his journal, and it was reprinted. This map, it was reprinted in 1612, which was the copy that I have. And so let's just briefly go through what makes this quite interesting. This site was visited by Saldanha in 1503, Spilbergen in 1601. Please get the next line there. And then in 1670, there was the castle was built, but before that, 1652, that actually started building the old fort. And there are some stones which can be seen today from 1622, in other words, from before Van Riebeck's arrival. And I'm not going to go through all the rest of those at this stage, but here is the really interesting map from 1675 by John Seller, and it's called A Draft of the Cape of Good Hope. What is quite interesting is the names. That is the Table Bay, but this was known as Sugarloaf, and this was the Lion's Rump, or known as James Mount. And here was Charles Mount, which is Devil's Peak today. There's a very distorted view of the Cape Peninsula, and you can see that there it's named. It's very difficult to see here. It's still called Saldania Bay, and what you also can't see here is Greenpoint. It was the first naming of Greenpoint. And this is a map that was produced by an Englishman known as John Seller from information that he'd got from the Dutch. And that's why there is a bit of a mixture. We've got English names, but we've got a Dutch flag over here because he published it in 1675. And what was interesting as well is that in 1620, the Captain Schilling and Fitzherbert from the English East India Company were in Table Bay. They saw a Dutch ship there and immediately decided this is an attractive place. We're going to take it for ourselves. They took a small boat to the shore, climbed Lion's Head and Signal Hill, erected a cairn, and then declared that this was now their land, and wrote a very long motivation to King James I, which they presented to him on their return. King James looked at their presentation and their suggestion that this could now be English country, and he said, no, I don't want it. So the English missed the opportunity, and the Dutch arrived in 1652. And here is a very romantic picture of, and a very unlikely scene of Jan van Riebeeck arriving in 1652. This painting is at the National Library of South Africa, and it was printed. It was painted by Charles Bell. And here is a blow up of the castle that you can see over here. And this picture became very famous. It was used for over a century by a number of different cartographers. And what was important is that it's got four corners, and you can see the Dutch flag over here. And here's another example by another Englishman who used the same picture. But this was in 1670, by which time it was now the castle and no longer a fort. Now the fort was built they started very soon after they arrived in 1652. And here are drawings from the Dutch National Archives, which are available if you go to the Atlas of Mutual Heritage, which is a very interesting site. There are a number of old maps and old drawings. And here is the castle with its, at least the fort, with its four bastions. And there was another area that was enclosed. The one at the back was for cattle. And this, I'm not sure exactly what they used for this, but they did also have cannons erected. And there were all sorts of facilities in the fort. As I was pointing out to someone before we started, the original settlers were forbidden from leaving the fort and the area close by. They were forced to stay there, and the Dutch who arrived had no colonial aspirations. In fact, they resisted it, and it was only in 1660s that they allowed some free burghers to acquire land on the Liesbeek. And here is a model by someone called Mike Peel of the original fort. And in the 1660s, it was made out of mud and wood, and it started to really suffer in the rain. And here is an excerpt from Van Riebeeck's journal. It says, the wet and foul and stormy weather continues. This caused the southern end of the Walvis Bastion also to cave in and collapse completely. And it became very clear that the fort couldn't be a permanent settlement. And so efforts were made to build the castle, which you can see here. And this is a map, a French map. In this particular one, it's a Scandinavian edition of that map. And we could see the castle over here. And the original fort was actually in this area right over here. And here is the Farsha River. And here we can see the layout as it was. This is as it is after the castle was built. Here was the original fort. Here was the Farsha River. The jetty was more or less over here. And this river also filled a moat that went all the way around the fort. What was important to appreciate as well was that the company's garden came far further south than it is now. It came almost to, not as far as Strand Street, but probably Short Market Street in that area. that is the extent of the gardens at that time. And here we can see a map of the Cape. Here is the fort, and you can see this is the original land that was provided to certain settlers around about 1660, and it was only then that settlers were allowed to move under controlled conditions as far as the Liesbeek, and they were not really permitted to go beyond that. And here again we can see a representation of the fort and the Varsche River. And I thought it'd be interesting to show right now something that I became aware of just the other day. And Inga, I don't know if you're listening and if you're still on mute, but if you'd like to unmute and say anything about it. But this is a kist from one of the carpenters who was operating at the fort, Adrian Willems van Brakel. And I don't know if you want to say anything about this heirloom of yours.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Well, all I know is the families always said that he came out and was a master carpenter eventually, listed as a master carpenter in 1666, but his earliest muster rolls appearance was in 1664. And yeah, it's just been handed down through the family, was in a museum in Stellenbosch and then granted back to the family. And my mom was the last van Brakel of the male line. And so she had the kist, and now it's in our curatorship as a family. So quite exciting to know. I mean, I've often wondered at them offloading such equipment off their ships. I'm really relieved to see that jetty, because I was wondering how on earth they got ashore. So yeah, it was listed as his toolbox. Yeah.
Oh, and 1664, well, I mean, that's when they were really considering the building of the castle, which, if I remember correctly, was 1667. I think it was completed. I can be corrected if that's so. And so he would probably have lived in the fort or in one of the small houses nearby. So thanks very much for sharing that with us. It actually brings the whole story alive to see something from that era, because there's very little left from the fort. So thanks very much.
That's a pleasure. Thank you for including it.
And for those of you who are interested, and this is from a research paper by Tim Hart and his company, where they did some excavations on the parade. This is the parade over here. This is Strand Street on the left. This is the Golden Acre, and this was where the fort was. And you can probably recognize the shape from the earlier diagrams that I showed you. And everything that I'm going to be speaking about today actually occurred in this, what I call a heritage hectare. And it's really quite interesting, and it's such a pity that there is very little left unless you go to the basement of the Golden Acre, where there are remnants of this wonderful reservoir built by Governor Wagenaar, and that was next to or just outside the fort, and it collected water from the Varsche River, and it was used by everyone, or it was a central point from which everyone could collect water. And here we can see what possibly was the outlet. I have not translated all the annotations there, and remnants of that are still visible at the bottom of Golden Acre. And here it is. Here is Wagenaar's reservoir, or what's left of it. And as we know, the water has now been tunneled. It's all underground, and that is a separate discussion entirely. But it is wonderful that this exists, but it's not part of the fort. It was actually separate from the fort. So we still don't, but it comes from the same era. Now, if you go down there, you will also see what I thought originally was the original postal stone. But this, I have subsequently learned, is actually a replica of the postal stone that was discovered when they were excavating the foundations of the Golden Acre. And they found not only the postal stone, but they also found the steps to help people ashore from where they landed their boats. But there was a jetty for a long time in the location that I showed you. And even in 1810, when William Birchnell arrived, that he landed on the jetty in that area. Presumably wasn't exactly the same jetty, but it was on the same site. And that today, if you want to try and understand it, it's opposite the castle, and the trains run over it every day. So that's where it was, and it was just right on Strand Street. And so they discovered, and these postal stones go back to before Van Riebeeck. So we have the reservoir, which is from the time after Van Riebeeck arrived. And here is a postal stone from 1635, and one that was discovered when they excavated it. And here it is in its box. And here it is in November 2021. Vandalized 400 years after the boat, the crew departed on the Wapen van Rotterdam, 9th of November, 1622, and they arrived in the Table Bay, and they were seen on the 5th of May by a French captain who was captain of the fleet of Montmercy, which was on its way to Indonesia. And he reports that there were 380 people on board, 60 had died of scurvy already, and as many were sick still from scurvy. I do not know the lot of those, but those who were sick, but they did proceed all the way through to Indonesia and did land there. Just as an aside, the death rate of scurvy on average was 30% of all sailors on long voyages. That was the average for over 300 years. And here is a picture of Victor Thompson, who discovered this. He's a carpenter. So that's a link to Inga. He was a carpenter who discovered this in 1974 while they were excavating the foundations. And this picture is the copyright of the independent newspapers, and it's I have borrowed it from UCT's website. So now the next part that is quite interesting is the fort disappeared. We ended up with a castle, and we still have the parade. And this is a map from the 1880s. You can see Adderley Street here, but the gardens start quite high up, at Wales Street, but they used to descend all the way through here, probably to Short Market Street beforehand. And what you will see here on the City Hall side of Strand Street is a railway station. And that area that had housed or had been the site of the fort became the first and the second railway station of Cape Town. And that is the next phase of from the mid 1800s. But before that, on the same site, and here we have the parade, there is this magnificent structure that had been designed by Tybalt, and it had been and it actually operated. If one goes to the internet, you will see there are stories that it actually never operated, but we know that it did operate in 1808, and also I have another evidence from 1810. And this is where the Farsha River would have run, and this would have been the site today of the Golden Acre. And you can see the tree-lined Strand Street over here, and these are the buildings which no longer exist. However, some artists managed to get to the roof of these buildings and produced some fantastic panoramas, which I'll show you later. And here they are. And here is a panorama taken from one of those Strand Street buildings close to where the jetty was. And here is this magnificent structure. I'm sorry for the poor join over here. I've joined two different panels which are set at an angle so that it can actually be circular. And this is this magnificent water fountain and pump, which was used by the entire town from about 1808. And here is a similar panorama done by William Burchell in 1815 after he'd returned from his 4-year trek. And he went to the top of the same building, almost identical, you can tell that from the perspectives. And here you will see that there is no fountain. So what happened? Well, the fountain was demolished. Well, why was it demolished? It seems like it had fallen into disrepair after the British had brought steel pipes in from the United Kingdom, from England in 1813 and 1814, and reticulated the water. In other words, they piped the water to all, or to houses, or to local regional pumps in Cape Town, and this became redundant, and so it was demolished. And the only evidence that I know of its existence is this panorama over here, the painting by Tybalt himself, and a town plan, street plan drawn by William Bertrand, 1810, in December of 1810, before he went on his trek. And he puts the parade here, and since he'd learned Dutch, he said Waterpomp, and he located it exactly there. And there is evidence from that I've been able to get from the archives that this did function for a number of years, and was the main source of, and a much welcome source of water. Now, there is something else that's of interest, and I'm going to come back to it again just now. Sorry, it's out of order. But what was also found under the Golden Acre, at the same site as the fort, and above, and what was later there, the water pump created by Tybalt, they found cannons. Now, what were cannons doing over there? And these were not cannons from the old fort. And here we see some astronomers, of all people, actually carrying it over here. And here's one using a block and tackle to lift it. And the clue came from this stone, 1838. And what that was, it was Maclear's cannon. And Maclear put two cannons out on the parade to identify, or to establish, a baseline for a triangle. And here is the reason for it. I'm sorry about this being in the wrong order. We can see here, this is a map from 1752. Well, the data comes from 1752, it was actually published in 1755. It's an important. There was a study done by Nicholas Louis Lacaille in 1752, and he had an observatory opposite the Golden Acre. If you look up from the Golden Acre and you look up Strand Street, it was the second house on the right-hand side as you look up Strand Street. And there used to be a plaque to him on the wall. It used to then be the Edgar's building, and that was stolen twice. And then it's now, well, and the replica was stolen after that. So that hasn't been replaced, and that building no longer exists. And what he wanted to determine, after having studied the southern skies, was he wanted to determine the shape of the Earth. And if you took the length of a meridian across 1 degree of latitude, so I said from 33 to 34, here it is, from 33 to 44 south, what was its distance? Was it the same as the distance in the northern hemisphere? In other words, was the Earth a circle? At that stage, they weren't certain in any detail about it. And so he constructed a baseline, and where Maclear also had baselines over here, and there are triangular monuments to that. But he established a baseline here, and then back to his observatory, and measured a whole lot of angles. And I'm not going to go into this geometry, but it's a wonderful trick for a wonderful opportunity for a matriculant to learn how to do geometry. By measuring the base here, its length, he knew what it was, and measuring these various angles, he could work out the distance from 33 to 34 south. Surprise, surprise, the Earth wasn't circle. He determined it was pear-shaped. The length was different from what he expected. The reason was determined by Maclear. And Maclear came along on the hint from George Everest, I gather correct pronunciation is Everest, repeated these measurements, but did them with a baseline on the parade. And here are people, this is a cartoon of people doing those measurements. And to establish the ends of the baseline, he implanted or sunk two cannons. And one of them was at the base of what is the is at the base of the Golden Acre. And he repeated it and found out that Lakai's calculations were 100% correct. What had happened was he had leveled his equipment using a plumb line and did not take into account the effect of gravity between bodies with mass, and that the Cape and the Table Mountain and the Piketberg at his northern northern terminus pulled the plumb bob, the weight at the base of his apparatus, pulled it towards the mountain, and therefore his equipment was not perfectly at right angles, not perfectly at right angles, and introduced a small error. So his measurements were correct, other than the fact that they had that small error, and that caused him to come up with a wrong shape of the Earth. And as a result of that, the meter at that time was defined as 1/10,000th of the distance between the North Pole through Paris to the equator, and they didn't make it as a fraction of the entire from North to South Pole because of this odd shape. And Maclear determined this 100 years almost, but took 8 years to do this after Lakai. That's the history of that canon. Now, we've got to jump on to another 40 years from Maclear, and the railway lines started to be opened. The main railway lines really developed from 1870 to 1900. Despite not having any of the necessary requirements in terms of coal, iron, people, even locomotives, they managed to construct a railway line from the Cape all the way through to Beira, and from East London and Port Elizabeth as well. And here is the first station in exactly where the Golden Acre is today. And that was constructed in 1870. And that gave way to this building. And there may be some people here who remember this building or variants of it, which was constructed in 1875 and demolished in 1968. So this was also on the site of that Golden Acre. And what we have now is a Golden Acre with a really interesting history. There were postal stones delivered in the 1600s before the Van Riebeeck arrived. Then there was a wooden mud fort built from 1652, demolished 1666. Wagenaar's reservoir, which is below the Golden Acre. Tybalt's fountain, which is demolished and disappeared, and nothing left of it at all. Nearby in 1849, by the way, was also a protest at the Commercial Exchange, which is opposite where the current General Post Office is, in protest against bringing prisoners to Cape Town, and they were sent on to Australia. And then in 1838, Maclear established his baseline for checking on Lakai's data. Then we had a first and a second railway station. And although it's not directly related to this, a tunnel was built between the post office and the railway station in order to ensure that post went immediately from the train to the post office and in the other direction as well in 1897. And that was when they discovered the first postal stone. And there's one issue that I haven't mentioned here because it doesn't relate to this area particularly. And that is that it has been stated, and it's I think on the internet, that there is a postal stone in the walls of the castle. And it is correct that there was a postal stone which had been used by 3 different ships that had left their messages on there. And it had been inserted into the wall upside down. And at a date that I have yet to determine, it was removed, replaced, and handed over to the Cape Town Museum. So the Golden Acre is part of what I call a golden heritage hectare, with a very long history, which is not apparent when you walk in there. And the story of Lakai is in this book, as too is a short history of the fort. And here we have this really interesting area, and it's really interesting. There's 400 years of fascinating history in this Golden Acre area over here. So thank you very much for listening. I hope I'm within 40 minutes, and I'm quite happy to take any questions. I'll leave the slide up for the moment, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Roger, that was fantastic. Delightful. Sanette, have you got any comments you want to relay?
No comments at this stage. Anybody have some questions?
So if someone is thinking about it, the jetty was opposite, was over here, exactly over here. And you'll see that this is called New Market Street, because the market that they used to use for the wagons was at Van Riebeeck Square, and it was located over here, which is getting towards the Good Hope Center, and that's why this was called New Market Street. And the gardens extended probably to Darling or Short Market Street over here.
That is fascinating.
I've got lots of questions.
Well, go for it.
Well, some of them are very prosaic. I mean, did the station get demolished because it wasn't big enough? It looked very beautiful.
Yeah, it's the story of time and increased traffic. And so they moved it. And the railway line actually caused quite a lot of damage. There was a beautiful knocker fort that had been in Woodstock, which was at Woodstock Station, and quite a few important historical buildings and sites were demolished when the new railway line was put there. And yeah, it was a question of extension of it needed more space. It was just too busy.
Thank you.
Who designed the Golden Acre building?
Vasgevra, I don't know.
Because I'm just thinking it's so insensitively organized. So if you think of the history, at least they did leave some parts uncovered underground, but I mean, gee whiskers, it's just quite ugly, I think.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is true of so many beautiful sites, isn't it? Where they've been replaced, and that had not been done with any sensitivity. And thank goodness they did discover those. And unfortunately, I don't think they're that much visited. Leslie, you can tell us, how many do many people go to the bottom of the Golden Acre? I mean, number one, do they go to the Golden Acre? Number two, do they actually go to the bottom and have a look at those at what is there?
No, the Golden Acre Centre itself is extremely busy, but it's people going through to get to the train station to and from work, and just going into the shops. And if you see them going down, they're not even looking at it. It's not really visited at all, which is a shame. Which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah. It's a really very interesting bit of history, and in itself is worthy of, I would think, of telling. And what is really sad is that that really beautiful structure that Tybalt designed and Anritha was involved in constructing has just disappeared from memory. And that one beautiful painting of it, which is torn, is at Museum Africa in Johannesburg. I think I must go and visit. I'm going up there sometime. Maybe I'll pocket it and bring it back to Cape Town.
Very good. We've got a question. Oh, sorry.
The postal stone that was upside down in the castle walls, which museum did you say it went to? Is it a Zico?
Yeah, it went to Zico. And it went to the Zico, and it went to the Cultural History Museum initially. And there are a couple of stones. There are stones. The stones are either in the Cultural History Museum, and Leslie, you can correct. You've been going through this as well, and in Grand Central at the old post office. And it's a question now, who actually owns them? Is it the city? We know that what was the South African Railways handed it over to Ezekiel, but it is said that some of the postal stones actually belong to the city. And Leslie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of them is going to go to the city hall, if I understand correctly.
As how was explained to me, the replica, which was vandalized, the original is sitting in the slave lodge. There's 6 in the slave lodge right now, and it's really worth going to have a look. And one of them will be moved to the city hall as for a new exhibition, but it's certainly worth going to the slave lodge to have a look at them.
And I will, having heard that, I'm going to go to SARA and I'm going to go and dig out all the original files and find out if it really was handed over to the city, because my understanding from a number of articles going back to 1939 is that they were actually handed to the museum, not to the city. And I guess my view is that those sorts of artifacts or objects, in my view, should be in a museum where they can be properly curated. However, they're not well curated in the Ezekiel. When I last went there, when I actually revived them, was involved in reviving them, they were locked in a room and nobody had the key to it. They had to send somebody out to go and find it. And they were all put together as colonial stones, including one from Plettenberg's beacon from Colesberg. But I think they are being better arranged now. I haven't been very recently. And Grand Central has done something with theirs as well. But they certainly should be properly curated to tell the story. And there is a wonderful book. Well, it's not wonderful to read, but it's a wonderful source. And it's called Before Van Riebeck, and it's by Ravenheart. And that was published in, I think, 1967. And this has got the extracts of the journals of all of the ships that left postal stones, amongst other things. It's got all the ships before Van Riebeck. He's actually gone and translated into English the logs of the captains as they relate to the visit to Table Bay. And so if you give me a stone apart from those that were discovered after 1967, I can look it up in Ravenheart's book, and we can actually get the full story. And that's how it was from that I found out that the postal stone found that it was at the Golden Acre belonged to a ship with 380 on board and 60 with scurvy. And that's thanks to Ravenheart. And that quality of research was actually quite fantastic.
Good evening.
Hi, Roy.
Dr. Stewart.
Yes, Roger, yeah.
Roger, okay. I'm speaking to you from Hillcrest. I actually live in Maritzburg. Rob Scott's my name.
Yes.
Some technical questions. Yes, I have spoken to you, and I look forward to meeting you.
You've been threatening to come to Cape Town for quite a while.
I have. I'm actually moving near to Wilderness, so I'll be on your doorstep. Look out.
Yeah.
Okay, some technical questions. I'm not all that familiar with the geology around Table Bay, but those enormous stones would seem to be, are they volcanic? Is that dolerite?
They're a mix as far as I understand. And I must be honest, I'm not a geologist. I'm very much an amateur geologist, and I'm not going to express an opinion on those, but they are varying kind, but most of them are fairly hard. And I'm not sure where they collected them and what particular stone. And certainly I think that is something that we should, Leslie and I are going to do a little more work on these postal stones, I hope, because they are really very interesting. And you're asking an important question. They must have been hard stones because the inscription lasted for a long time. They were always very carefully wrapped as well. But they looked like a mix of different stones. And we need a geologist's opinion.
Okay, many thanks, because as far as I'm aware, the sort of predominant rock around there is sandstone. Am I not right?
There's a number of different layers. If you want a little bit of entertainment with geology, Cape Peninsula, and Google it, and you'll find there's some absolutely stunning articles on the geology. And it goes all the way from, there's sandstone, there's mudstone, there's granite. There are a whole lot of different stones of different ages.
Okay. The next question is the first fort, despite not being, well, it looks like probably was of quite considerable size, built of mud and wood. That's an awful lot of wood.
Yeah.
And as someone who harvests timber myself in the field and uses it, that is a vast quantity. It would have been hewn locally, or would it have come off ships? I suppose it's a mix.
Almost certainly would have, it might have come from ships, and almost certainly would have come from the Newlands Forest area, because the first road in Cape Town was in fact to the Newlands Forest. And so they'd have probably got it from there, quite a lot of their wood from there.
Okay, many thanks. Look forward to meeting you probably next year. Thanks.
Somewhere I actually have the dimensions of it, and I just don't have that to hand at the moment. Oh, here we go. It had 4 or 5 meter high bastions, and they occupied an imaginary square with sides of 85 meters long and an inner courtyard 50 by 50. So yeah, it was quite big. I don't know how much wood and how much mud, but given that it was collapsing all the time, I think there was a fair amount of mud in that.
Okay, because yeah, that is a massive volume of timber and endeavor on the part of which I imagine it was built by sailors.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a few ships that came out. Yeah.
Right.
And I'll be honest, I don't know what the complement of the ships was, but that was that was the first road, was to go and get wood.
Okay. And then the first burning of lime, the burning of seashells, I imagine would have been a parallel endeavor time-wise.
It was, and there was a kalk brannery at the beginning of Woodstock, and that was one of the areas, and there are a number of different areas, yeah. And Dan Slake can talk wax lyrical about that, because he is able to identify when the walls were built by the presence of seashell-based lime, yeah.
Okay.
So it would have occurred at the parallel, that would have occurred obviously as they were building the castle.
Okay, because it would seem that in the interior of the fort, you had some quite substantial buildings.
Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah, and this is why you must buy the book, you see, because it's
I
got
know,
all that information
definite. Yes. Okay.
Apologies for that. I'm not really punting the book, but yeah, I've got some of the information, but not all on the fort itself. But it was a substantial. A lot of people just thought it was a little, just a couple of wooden pikes, and that was all. But it was actually a substantial building with accommodation and different areas for different functions.
And absolutely no traces of those central formal buildings left or ever been discovered, I would gather.
There are, I can't tell you which parts right offhand, but there were test digs done by Tim Hart. And if you, Cape Town Fort Archaeology and Tim Hart, you'll probably find it on the internet. It's a really extensive and very, very interesting report that is generally available. I've got it on my computer, but I don't have it in front of me right now.
Yeah, many thanks.
Are some questions?
Archaeology, not geology, sorry, yeah.
Roger? Mary Bradley asked if all the maps that you showed are in your book, all the maps we saw.
No, parts of the maps are. That map by Lakai is there. The other map that I showed, that picture is in there, but this is a relatively small book. So some of the map, the Lakai map is actually quite small, not much bigger than this book. But the other one by Seller is larger. But yes, that is in the book as well. And because the book is about essays inspired by maps, so there are maps or bits of map, parts of maps in virtually every chapter.
Okay, and then Michael Anderson asked whether cattle were kept at the old fort, and how they were protected from wild animals. Yeah,
I haven't got it. If I can, let me just go and show you if I can. Share. Let me see if I can find it. There, it was in this area over here, which was meant to be the cattle pen, and that was on the southern side. This was the seaside of the fort, and my understanding from the diagrams I've seen, they were kept there. And to get more diagrams of this, if one goes to the Atlas of Mutual Heritage and selects Cape of Good Hope, there's an actually stunning array of diagrams from the 1600s.
Excellent. The Golden Acre was designed by Louis Carroll Architects. That's from Timothy Fisser.
Oh,
those were the architects. Louis Carroll.
Okay.
And just thanks, awesome talk from Avril Patterson. Sabine Lehman said that when the Golden Acre opened, the ruin was quite a thing, and many people went to look at it closely at the time. But it's a very busy thoroughfare now.
Yeah, it really is. And of course, everyone's walking above the history, which is to be expected. But I'm not, Leslie, how prominent is it? Is it prominently displayed? Any signs to say, go down and you'll find relics or remnants or ruins of the old reservoir?
I don't think there are any signs. I just go down there. It's not difficult to find once you're there.
Once you know where to go, yeah.
Once you know where to go.
There's nothing I think that attracts people.
And if you ask any security, they'll point you in the right direction. They do know it's there, and it's pretty big. It's certainly worth going to have a look. It's pretty big.
Yeah, and let's just hope that nobody tries to penetrate through to the to what's left of the reservoir and destroys that, like they tried to do with the stone. Although who the hell wants to try and destroy a stone, and to try and pick it up, you've really got to be kind of strange.
Very interesting to me that the stone at the castle was upside down. Why would that be?
Because a number of artisans couldn't read. And that is true on quite a few maps that one sees in the text. Sometimes a letter block would fall out for whatever reason, and it would be replaced by an artisan. And so quite often you find letters upside down, sideways, and that's almost certainly what the reason for it is, that the artisan couldn't read.
Okay. That's fascinating.
As I say, if you look at old texts where they used letterpress, called letterpress, where they just had individual bits of type and they put them into a block, you'll sometimes find that. Usually the editor or the author would have picked it up. But it's particularly when there were corrections that had to be made, that when something broke or fell out, that you'd get those errors creeping in.
So what was the potal stones, what were they covered in to protect them?
They used canvas, and some also had tar on them to protect them, because clearly they had to be protected against weathering. And to find out what was on each one, I'd have to go to those original documents at SARA, but my reading of it has been that it was either canvas, ship's canvas, and or tar.
Thank you.
Which they used to use for plugging holes. So that's what it would have been. And what was interesting is that the stones were recycled. Obviously, no one wanted to go and find a stone and lug it. So they'd rather take somebody else's stone. And some of them have got as many as 4 different ships' messages on them. So there was a bit of recycling taking place at that stage as well.
There's a new comment from Hislop. Sorry, Roger, you're still busy?
No, I'm done.
Roger Hislop said, thanks for the fascinating talk, Roger. I remember in the 1980s, there was some unearthed fort-related artifacts displayed in a case on the parade. Do you know where they may be now and what they were?
I do not know, but I would imagine, and when I go through to SARA, I'm going to try and find out, and I can only imagine that they were sent to the museum. And they would either have been, but they could have been the old Cape Fort, but they could also have been from Woodstock, where the Fort Knocker was demolished. And at one stage, they actually found an old sentry box, and the whole sentry box, massive metal sentry box, was actually shipped all the way through to the current Iziko Museum, and it was stored there. And I don't know what's happened to that.
Jim also added that he recently spotted some old cannon from Fort Knock at the Salt River Railway Works opposite the River Club.
Say that again. So he found the old cannons.
Yeah, some old cannon from Fort Knocker at the
Yes.
Salt River Railway Works opposite the River
Yeah.
Club. Spotted that.
Well, who's that? Because I'd love to actually go and see it.
That's also Jim.
You can send it to me offline. You can send it to me afterwards. Just I'd love to know who that was, because that is new to me. I wasn't aware of that. But that's obviously from Fort Knocker. And Salt River, Woodstock, that would gel. That made sense, because that was also where that people used to cross over to go outside the colony in the early days, was near Fort Knocker and over the Salt River.
Some more comments. Leslie Cox asked whether you knew about any postal stones in other countries.
I haven't researched that. There must be, and I would imagine that one would find them in Brazil, and I would imagine you'd find a lot there, and in Indonesia, and on the west coast of India, where the Portuguese and the Dutch all visited, and the other, and I know there are some, is Mauritius.
Can I say something here?
Please do.
I've got a photograph of a stone that was recovered underwater in 1804 by Janssens. And it's quite interesting that the actual date of it is an English ship by the name of Dragon that passed the Cape in 1604 with some others as well. And I think that stone is in Holland.
The Dragon should be at Iziko, and I was looking it up quickly.
The guy's name was Middleton.
But where was it found?
It was found in the ocean by the Batavians when they were here. They found it and they pulled it out of the rocks or the surf.
That's interesting, because I haven't seen, if you've got, it was 1618, the Dragon.
No. Let me get mine.
Okay. Because there was one that was also discovered underwater by the Milnerton Water Club. And I'm not aware at all of that one that you're mentioning now. So I'd love some information on that.
This particular one, it says July 30th, the Dragon, anno 1604, Henry Middleton, General of the English Fleet. And I can't remember what it's, another word that I can't quite read here. Henry Delft on board, homeward on the 10th, on the 1606. That is the one heading, and there's another one.
That's
There's a second one also with Henry. He came back again. Henry Middleton, General in the trade, engraved pepper, corn, and it looks like Darling. Can
you send me that reference? If necessary, just take a photograph of it and send it to me.
I've got a photograph. I'll send it to you. You're welcome to it. But I do know.
I'd love to exchange information on it and to find out where that is now. Where do you know where that is?
It's in Holland, as far as I'm aware, in The Hague.
Is there any chance we could see you in the stone? I'm just coming up with Barbara, and I didn't catch your name.
My name is Ian van Oort.
Oh, great.
Oh, you're Ian. Okay.
Oh, Ian. Hi. And it's Barbara's.
Yeah.
I understand.
I need my wife to keep me up to date with all the computer technology.
Oh, don't worry. And we can't wait for
You're in a large
Thursday.
queue of people who are in that position.
I know.
Ian,
I belong to the designer.
I'd really be interested to know. So please send me that info. You've got my email address.
Yeah, or you could do it via me.
I don't, but I'll get it from Kate.
Yeah.
You know, you've sent emails to me before when I've given talks at the Military History Society.
Okay, well, but I've got a problem there in that Johan is, is in the hospital at the current moment.
Okay. I'll send you. Anyway, but that's really
it's just after 6, so We need to finish quite soon.
That's fine.
The sentry box is still at the slave lodge.
Is it at the slave lodge?
Yes.
Okay, that's very good news. I'm interested to hear that because the museum was originally in where the National Library is. Then it moved to the slave lodge, and then it moved to where the main one is now. And the slave lodge, as you know, for a while was cultural history, so it's still there. Okay. Have you seen it there, Leslie? Excellent. Could you do me a favor, take a photo when you're next there and send it to me? Thank you.
Do we have time for another comment? Not really.
Now, I've got a couple other questions I would like to ask, but it needs to be a little bit more appropriate time, not now.
That's fine. You can contact me anytime and we can chat about it.
Great, Roger. Thanks.
But thanks very much for that bit of information, because I'm not aware of it, and I'd like that bit of information. And thanks to everyone for all your questions. I always learn from the questions because it reveals what I don't know, and that's always very useful. And I've learned quite a lot today, so thank you very much. And such an esoteric subject, and we've gone on for an hour and 5 minutes. So thank you, Kate, for organizing it, and Leslie, thank you to you, and also to Inga for your insert of info.
And that was just great. And Ian, we are really looking forward to hearing about your battle research and seeing your images. And Roger, I hope you'll join us. And
I'm going to try.
Please, if anyone's got other questions, don't hesitate to ask Roger via me. I'm just going to get a friend to edit the recording, and then I'll send everyone the link and do share it.